from the Keynesians, from the monetarists. So I thought I'd start with a couple of definitions from the Oxford Dictionary, which might please us all and it might not. It says of capitalism, an economic system in which the production and distribution of goods depend on invested private capital and production for profit. Secondly, it says the dominance of private owners over capital and production profit. In Chambers, it says, rather broad succinctly, my favourite dictionary, a capitalist is one who derives income and power from capital. And of capitalism, it says the economic system that generates and gives power to capitalists. That's very important. And it even says state capitalism, a system for control, state control, and use of capital. I think that's what Eamonn was confused with socialism. For the purpose of this debate, the alleged differences between the definitions of capitalism are totally irrelevant, because socialists consider all of them ruthlessly exploitative and totally undesirable. Theoretical refinements of a corrupt and oppressive system. What socialists propose is a world without markets, without money, without wages, without state or leaders, a truly classless society. The Oxford Dictionary says of us, a political and economic theory of social organisation which advocates the means of production, distribution and exchange should be regulated or owned by the whole community. If you remove the word exchange and substitute and for or, it gives us a reasonable starting point. Owned by the community as a whole. What a lovely phrase. It describes the very basis of socialism. Our term for it is common ownership and is core to our case. The idea is anathema to capitalists, and their usual response is to dismiss it, a little as Eamonn did slightly, as hopelessly impractical, or at best the fanciful notion of naive dreamers at worst. Actually, I have worse than that said, but never mind about that. Yet for our distant ancestors, producing and sharing together was a normal way of life. Why on earth is it considered practical, sensible, or reasonable that our common inheritances, land, minerals, crops, the bountiful produce of nature, and all the resources of the earth should all be hijacked in the interest of privileged minorities? Is it practical, sensible, or reasonable that light, warmth, food, water, medicines, and shelter produced from these resources, the basic necessities of life, the things we all need to survive, or desire to make life more pleasurable, are produced primarily, and some might say only, for profit? And that in order to make that profit, the vast majority of those inhabiting our planet must needs be exploited, often degraded, frequently cheated, and alas, sometimes literally worked to death. Is it practical, sensible, or reasonable that as a direct consequence of the profit motive, so-called surplus food and crops are destroyed, life-saving medicines and vitamins are deliberately underproduced, or that every empty home in London should be boarded up and left unoccupied? It's not right, is it? It isn't practical or reasonable or sensible. Nor is it practical, reasonable or sensible that millions of unconsidered human beings should be left to live or die in misery and squalor, while others prosper. Earthquakes, tsunamis, and other major catastrophes never fail to elicit a generous and warm response from people. routine tragedies, terrible sufferings, every day, every moment that we live, affect far more people than those catastrophes, and they remain unnoticed. But that, I'm afraid, is the harsh reality of good old, oh so practical and efficient capitalism. Astonishingly, a system still resignedly accepted by the very people struggling within it, trapped by an assiduously reinforced mindset of a seriously flawed assumption. Common ownership is common sense, and the only possible foundation for another fundamental principle of socialism, that production should be only for use and not profit. The plain fact is that whatever theoretical differences between the various key players on the monopoly board of capitalism, profit is the medium that binds them all together. The theoretical evo-sleep. The vigorous pursuit of profit is sometimes considered to be both necessary and desirable and even virtuous by capitalists. Maximizing profits means that 10 times as many workers are employed in selling rather than producing. And production for profit leads to gross waste and inefficient use of resources, and it also makes people ill. A virulent disease, far more widespread and deadly than swine flu, is the profit imperative panic syndrome. Middle managers and above, in both private and public services, are particularly susceptible to it. Under pressure from their bosses to produce an annual profit, or at least a drastically reduced loss, while increasingly constrained by ever-diminishing budgets, they opt to work beyond their agreed hours without pay. What Upton Sinclair called giving the bosses time for the church. Last year, 5 million employees worked 7 hours a week for nothing. Calculated as a £27 billion gift to the employers, far exceeding the so-called strikes. Work-related stress, this is a fact, is the third leading cause of death in young men. Why should we be surprised? Long hours, low wages, no security. Even a permanent contract may only be 6 months. A change of ownership under the Thatcher legislation frequently results in a revised, almost invariably worse condition of employment and lower pay. 6-month contract, 40-year mortgage, job insecurity, mounting debts. It's not rocket science, is it? Why people get stressed. The earliest example of writing, which was discovered in Babylon, was about debt, believe it or not. And in 1996, Lifetime Television received the Cable Ace Award for the best game show ever. It was called